Be happy, happy, happy.
Be happy, be happy, mommy.
Come on, keep your chin up. Enjoy this time.
Smile,
Smile, smile, my darling.
Honey, you gotta count your blessings.
Welcome to Creative Mamas Unplugged. We are your hosts. I'm Cherice Barton.
And I'm Shelly Hutchinson. Creative Mamas Unplugged is a podcast where we navigate the hell out of being a creative mom with humor and heart.
We will have honest conversations,
Hear wise words from fellow badass mamas,
and share hilarious stories around motherhood for some much-needed comic relief. Listen, motherhood is the most creative, most difficult job in the world. You are not alone, and you deserve to be happy.
Welcome back. Today we're chatting with the amazing Jame Denbo, co-executive producer of Grey's Anatomy and creator of American Princess. Jame has written and developed pilots for Showtime, FX, Comedy Central, written feature scripts for Universal, Disney, and more. She is a talented performer and a mom of two beautiful teenagers. In this episode, Jame shares her journey from improv comedy to Hollywood and balancing work and motherhood. We dive into parenting challenges, the impact of technology, and how improv helps Jame connect with her kids. This episode is full of laughs, honesty, and heart. One of my favorite conversations. Let's dive in with Jame.
So Shelly, Jame and I used to live in the same neighborhood before I moved up here. We're closer to Malibu now. We were at the same school, which was lovely. And there was something that I loved. I did feel a sense of community amongst creatives who were parents. Everyone in the industry doing their thing, trying to make it work, trying to show up for the school events. And we all kind of supported each other. And it just felt like that. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. We lost our community. We moved up here and I felt very isolated because I was up here, not knowing any other families.
Yep.
And then when the kids started back to school, it was hybrid and I didn't meet any parents for a long time.
Yeah.
That was sort of where this, Shelly and I, Shelly's also a choreographer, a director, a producer. She works in New York. So we were having these conversations and it just felt so important to connect with another mom, not just a mom who was going through it. All the moms were going through it during COVID. But the fact that we also work as creatives, and it was just like, I don't know, we just kind of felt this momentum. And we'd been talking about it for a long time. And that's why we decided to do this podcast. It's just been so heartwarming, connecting with so many beautiful women who are just going through it.
I sort of think about your theory for this podcast and sort of what is the crossover between artists and creatives and being a mother. And what's really interesting is I was like, what is the sort of difference? And, what I've kind of boiled it down to in a way, for myself at least, because we exist in these sort of ambiguous spaces and our work is also very much our passion and our extracurricular, and it's not as defined as a job sometimes, many times. We don't stop being those artists and creatives when we have children. Whereas like the world and the culture that we live in is very set up for like maternity leave and these dates. And then you come back and you resume your position at your job. And so our setup for parenting is already in a different mindset. At least it was for me. I didn't stop doing what I do when I was pregnant, when I was, you just don't stop thinking like a creative ever. And honestly, it infuses, I think, your parenting to a certain degree too, because it's like, if you're a lawyer, you're not necessarily lawyering when you're taking care of your children. But if you're a creative, if you're a musician, I'm not. If you're a visual artist, I'm not really. But if you're a comedian, right, which I am. Or you're a writer, or you're someone who is generating ideas or an improviser, that is something you're doing while you're parenting. So it's just a different way of being a parent, I think, in a lot of ways. Not better or worse, just different.
Yeah, we always talk about how all parents are creative. It also has its challenges,
Oh, yes.
So I wanted to ask you, your journey in the creative industry is so inspiring. Jame, you are so Incredible. I mean, you've done improv, sketch comedy. You've been a showrunner. You're a writer. You're an actor. You're a co-executive producer on Grey's Anatomy now. I didn't know that. I knew you were a
Yeah.
writer.
Tell my mother all of this. Maybe that'll give me some credit. Well, it's been a very indirect path, a very winding path, which I think, I can best without listing all the weird turns that my life has taken, suggest that when your background is really most solidly in improv and improv comedy and existing in that world as a young artist and as someone in your 20s, you kind of develop this persona of I go where the job is. And because you're sort of equipped to both perform and write, those opportunities sort of wind up presenting themselves or you're going after them in various ways because that route seems like it's more welcoming or whatever. So it sounds a little crazy because it's like, so how does someone from improv comedy wind up working on Grey's Anatomy? By a series of weird accidents and a willingness to pull that thread and go with it. So it's not as unusual when you remember that like all of the creators and writers and actors on, say, like The Office or Parks and Rec or at Saturday Night Live, like they have these varied careers. A lot of people in those worlds don't wind up on 1 hour network drama. That was a very strange left turn that happened again out of just like weird luck at one point when the showrunner at the time of Grey's Anatomy had another show like 5 or 6 years ago and was looking for a comedic voice in the writer's room for this legal show. And I mean, it was truly so insane to me that my agent would even offer me for such a job that I said, I can't. And she said, you do, and you can just meet with her. And I just think a lot of people who have my background, which is much more common in sort of the comedy areas, would have been like, well, I'm not even interested in me, but in that world. And I was. Because to me, I was like, I actually don't have any other opportunities. Because it was also at the beginning of the pandemic. So I didn't really have a ton. And thank God I took the job or took the opportunity because it led me from that show to Grey's. But it was just amazing to have work at that moment in our history. So, yeah, I hope that sort of answers my very strange reaction to, my journey is all over the place. It's so weird.
Can I ask you a quick? Oh, I'm sorry, Cher. Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say because you mentioned like when you're in your 20s and you go where the gig is.
Yep.
And that's right. And like you just take and grab what you can. Do you feel like once you had your kids that was kind of the catalyst behind some of the decision making, or like how did you balance like what was a personal decision or what was best for your family and what was a professional decision? Because that's a big one, right?
Yes and no. You know what? I never. I had a comedy act running for a long time that was sort of an alternative comedy act. And first of all, I just incorporated my pregnancy into the character. And then certain things were always in motion in terms of generating my own material. So that just didn't stop. I mean, you hear it, by the way, proof of that mentality is in every stand-up comedian's, like immediately half of their material is about being a parent. Just go to Nick Kroll and John Mulaney and, Amy Schumer. I mean, that's what happens, right? So if you're in that creative space already generating material, your new experience in life informs that, right? So, but then as far as taking opportunities, again, I was such and continue to be such a scrapper and because of so much of my career up to that point, frankly, up until this gig on Grey's Anatomy, I always laugh. I'm like, this is the longest job I've ever had by like 3.5 years. Most jobs that someone who worked like I did inconsistently and sporadically over 20 years, our gigs are very short. So there was never something that felt like I can't do that because I have kids. Although one thing that changed actually, now as I'm speaking, I remember the one thing I let go once I had my children was auditioning for commercials because I had been pretty successful in commercials for a long time over the course of my career. But commercials are so you audition for 20 to 100 to book one. And I realized that the stats were just, it was two against me. The percentage, it was just like, it will cost me more in paying some unemployed singer-songwriter to watch my kid for 4 hours, to drive all the way to Santa Monica to do what we call a bite and smile. You know, when you take a bite of something and smile at the camera. I was like, for me, there's so little, the odds are so against me to book this that it's not worth it. So I was like, nope, can't do it. So I backed out of auditioning for commercials, and I have never looked back. But you know what I've found, and I think it takes someone at this age, which is into my 50s, to look back and be like, that was worth it. Other things definitely presented themselves because I made myself available from, you know, hours and hours of traffic heading out to those kinds of auditions. And now so much is self-tape online anyway. But even so, it was just the odds were too stacked against me. And I have friends my age who, you know, moms who still are dedicated to auditioning for commercials and book them and do great. But for me, I wasn't that solid a booker. It was too rare an occasion.
Wow, you set a boundary around that, and look what it opened up for you. I think that's the gig, right?
Yeah. And you know, the other thing that was nice about my strange career or work as it was and as it would come in and as we would, is that I got to raise my own kids. We never had a full-time nanny, which, by the way, no judgment. God bless the nannies of America and the people who work consistently enough to be able to need them and afford them. But I'm grateful that, I mean, it's not that we didn't have childcare. Like I said, I had a zillion ex-improv students on my phone to come over and watch the kids, and I used them regularly. But we never, because my work was so sporadic and always had been, we didn't have the need. And I look back and I'm grateful. That time is fleeting. It doesn't feel like it when it's happening, but it fucking is. Mm-hmm. And suddenly it's gone. So I'm grateful that I did have a lot of that time myself. And we just patched it together for as best as we could.
That's great. We did the same. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
It's, you know, no. I too had a list of dancers who I could call upon, you know, and for a short time in Hollywood, we did have a part-time nanny who was just wonderful, and I could rely on her, and I could, you know, now we don't have a nanny. We have community. I've got other parents. I've got babysitters. But when I travel for work, I mean, it is a chunk of time. I have to sit down with the calendar and be like, okay, this person is going to pick up fun. This person is going to drive them to dance class. This one is gonna, and it takes so much time to put it in the calendar.
It's like bookkeeping. I mean, it is a huge job. And yes, and for us at the time, we had to do it that way. We just couldn't justify a full-time nanny. I mean, it would have been lovely to have that consistency probably, but I have to look at what the positive side of it was. Yeah. Which was that I was slightly more present, and hopefully they got a lot out of the assortment of, you know, ragtag group of weirdos who were trying to make it in the business that would accept cash. You know, they did not, you know, so it was, but it was a patchwork, and it still is, because, you know, now I have teenagers that want to go everywhere, and one of them is on her way to getting her license, but she's sort of an anxious driver. And, you know, the other one, it's like now I'm just a chauffeur, and I'm paying people to be chauffeurs a lot of time. I let them do ride share a lot, but still, I mean, that adds up too. Ugh. Yeah. It does, especially in LA. Oh yeah. I mean, fortunately my son has learned how to take the bus, but even that is like, where are the kids going to school? That was another very challenging thing living in Hollywood, the whole school situation. It's like that in New York too, you know, like the hundreds of people lottery to get into charter schools. Right. It is so foreign to me, having grown up in a small New England town and like just going to the high school. I mean, I'm not going to hide my resentment and fury about the entire system. I hate it. My husband was a little bit more open to it because he grew up in New York City. So he understood a little bit about how those things sort of work. We had terrible luck with middle schools. We went through a zillion of them. I mean, truly a bunch. My son went to 3 different middle schools in 3 years. Not because of him, I must make that clear, but because the schools fell so short and he had such a bad experience. One was private, but it had lost all of its, it was tiny. He had a class of 10 or 12 people. He didn't jive with anyone. He was like, I really want to go to a bigger school. He went to a public middle school associated with Citizens. At that moment, and I don't know what it's like now, it was severely under-resourced, and it was a bit of a receptacle for a lot of kids who had been asked to leave other private schools. So there were a lot of rougher kids who he did not have a good social experience there. And I found that the academics and education and there were no extracurriculars, none. One sport twice a year and nothing else. There was no arts program. There was nothing. It wasn't their fault. It was just a failed endeavor at that moment. So we pulled him and put him in a somewhat decent middle school for 8th grade at a school where a bunch of kids had already been together since kindergarten. It was a terrible run, and it was bad luck, and it was pandemic, and it was the system that exists in Hollywood and LA. It was all those things converging. I don't blame anyone completely. I blame an entire convergence of shit. So good news is my daughter is a senior at LACSA at this moment, the Los Angeles County High School of the Arts. My son is a freshman there. She's very interested in the arts. He is still figuring out who he is, but the school itself, it has a decent academic program, and I find it to be a gentler high school experience in this city socially. I think the kids are a lot of artists, so there's a lot less of the kind of, I don't know, the bullying, the sort of clique situation. I mean, it's high school. There's always going to be that crap, but it's not as bad. And I happen to think the administration is very, very, very good. They're very communicative. It's a school we know. So while he's going to an arts high school, doesn't mean he's going to be an artist, an actor. No. And we say, you don't have to be. You don't have to. But as a theater, quote unquote, major at that school, you spend every afternoon doing theater. And for us, we take that as, at this age, that's like doing a really great sport. It's a team sport. You're learning all the disciplines that you need to function with other people and create a project. It's project-based learning. So far we're very happy at that high school. No school is perfect, period, end stop. Probably not in these beautiful little idyllic small towns either, but definitely not in Los Angeles and some of these big cities. They are falling short on multiple levels. And do not get me started about higher education in this country, because I would be perfectly happy if my children did not go to college. But I think that they've also been sort of influenced to believe that that is typically where you should go. But as a Jew in this moment, I am not interested in paying lots of money for indoctrination.
I agree with you 100%. And I say that to my kids all the time. You don't have to go to college.
I mean, if my daughter goes to her college of choice, which I'm not going to say out of jinxing, I will be vetting every professor.
Jame, I love your perspective when you said no school is perfect. And that perspective as a mom is huge, because I remember having a baby and having other moms with babies the same age. And they're like, so what school are you looking at? And I was like, I haven't brushed my fucking hair in 5 days. Are you kidding me? We got 4 years on this. But in New York City, like you were saying, vying to go to a public school, you're in competition to go to a public school. I couldn't even get the one on the corner. Is there a perfect school? To your point, no. And you saying that, I feel like just liberated my mind. And I probably liberate so many minds of moms who are trying to think about, it's not just about what works best for your kid, but thinking on a grander level, I got to get the perfect school. It doesn't exist in your opinion.
I mean, and also even what you're saying, it's okay, so let's say the perfect school in your mind for your kid is an hour and a half commute. You really have to think about how are you going to use that extra 3 hours a day with a kid in that commute? Is your kid the kind of kid that's actually going to read a book on that commute? Are they going to be zoning out on a phone? Are you going to actually talk to them? How are you going to make up for whatever it is that you that they might be losing because you've picked this, what you believe is the perfect school. And like, I sort of feel like also the important thing to know is that these schools change. My experience with a lot of the private schools in Los Angeles, and we have been through a healthy heaping of those as well, not at the high school level, but definitely at the elementary and private. My experience is that all these private schools start out with this incredibly idyllic mantra or this directive that sounds incredible. They are going to be this level of academic rigor. They are going to be this level of social justice. They're going to be this level of social emotional. And they sound amazing and they really want to do that. And because of the system and because of outside forces, whether it is technology or parental insanity, generational parental stressors, whatever it is that's happening in our society, it is impossible for them to consistently stay at those standards. And so the schools themselves go through changes. And just remember that like teachers come in and out. Your teacher, your son or daughter or non-binary kid might be at a school that is not great and have a teacher who is absolutely spectacular, sees them, teaches them everything they need to know. Your kid might be at one of the most expensive private schools in Los Angeles and have a host of mediocre, overpaid or underpaid, because no teacher's overpaid, but let's say in private they're getting a little bit more money, who sucks. And I've seen it. These people, our teachers are human beings. You have worked in many places. You've had good bosses and bad bosses. You have great friends and friends that have failed you. Teachers are human too. And I really believe it's a lot of it is luck. Your kid winds up at the school that they're in, and sometimes they get a shit teacher and sometimes they get an amazing one. And sometimes there is so much turnover and there's just nothing you can do. So yeah, hedge your bets, you do your best. I really believe that like talking to your kid, finding out who they are and how you can then supplement their experience, not in an insane way, but like, for instance, like, you know, I don't think my son will ever listen to this. And, you know, we've had to really like figure out how much to push him and what is going to get resistance and what things that we can really follow through with. And he's in this place right now where he's in ninth grade. The first semester of ninth grade for any kid is difficult. It just is. It's high school. It's different. Everyone's older than you. It's hard. And I'm sort of like looking at this midway point right now in his freshman year going like, okay, we need to try and set this kid up for some success because I don't trust the pure academic settings that he's in. A lot of that is California standards. A lot of that is the standards that have changed since the pandemic. A lot of that is, you know, there was just an article that I read somewhere about how a lot of classrooms are now just teaching to the middle and not always teaching, they're teaching to the lowest achievers in academically. That's just I'll find the article for you. But it's like when that happens sometimes, I think there's a boredom. There's just a lot of things that are going on in our educational systems right now, in my belief. I know that by the time my daughter did test optional for ACT, SAT, those are going to change in a couple of years. And we're going to have the ACT and SAT back. So what can I do now without making him feel like so much pressure? I'm not an academically pressuring parent. I never really have been. That said, I want him to feel like he can do something. Do I, at this point, when he is a freshman, start getting him a little ACT diagnostic, maybe a little tutoring on how to take tests? I don't think they're going to be covering a lot of how to take those tests at an arts high school. I know they're not. What can I do now, knowing that we're probably going to go back to that won't feel like he's under pressure, and to talk to him and be like, look, you are under no pressure to succeed. We're going to take a diagnostic ACT. Oh, believe me, he was like, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. I said, I know, I'm giving you some time to get used to it. We won't do it until late January. But I do think that I have to start thinking that way for him, because I don't trust that our academic institutions are quite, I think they're getting a lot of influence from the internet. I think they're getting a lot of influence from outsized opinions from parents. I know I sound like I'm on a soapbox now and I've been talking for 20 minutes. Wait, I have one more thing to say.
This is your soapbox though, by the way, like that's why you're here. So please continue.
I genuinely believe that part of the reason you felt so much pressure, Shelly, and I felt so much pressure is because when we had our babies, Facebook, suddenly there was a forum at our fingertips with everybody's opinion in writing, which looks very official. We used to joke that our third parent was Google, but it kind of was. You know, do I sleep train? Should I sleep train? What are the opinions? 5,000 opinions what it does, I think subconsciously, is it suppresses your maternal or paternal instinct a little bit. You stop asking, wait, would sleep training be right for me? Would I be comfortable putting myself through the critical thinking of what will that experience be for me, my child, in my home, with my partner, without my partner? What will that be like? And get the answers. And instead, we look for like Reddit forums, right? And I experienced this. I mean, I'll send you another thing that I wrote when my son was about 5 or 6 years old. It was a summary of my experience. I don't know if you ever saw it, Cherice. Did you? It went sort of viral. I still get thoughts about it. My son was kicked out of multiple preschools for biting. Biting, by the way, is a typical developmental stage.
Yep.
But at that moment, because of Facebook and the internet and everybody becoming a parenting expert because they had a kid, it became very pathologized in that moment. I don't know if it still is, but I assure you, it was devastating and embarrassing for us and really difficult. And we were very shamed, and it became a whole cycle. And we went through every possible cure for this biting that we possibly could. I mean, we went to psychiatrists, we had evaluated, we went to the thing, we got him a shadow at his preschool. I mean, we went through all the things, right? And I have this article that I read about it. I was like, if he's biting in kindergarten, that seems like something like a real problem. But he wasn't, and he didn't. And eventually, by the time he was 5 or 6 years old, I wrote this whole article, and it was called Just a Phase, which is not something that we use. We don't use that phrase anymore. Everything is a problem to be fixed, not a phase that a child will go through. And I sort of missed those days. And so I feel like there was this, again, a convergence in that moment when our kids were little, Shelly. What makes 25 moms experts? Why are we even asking? But it's not even, it doesn't even matter that it's out there. We just, it's what it does to us and our confidence as parents.
I want to cry. I want to cry. I actually am going to cry because I want to say this. Everything you just said is so good. Like, I love you just said, like, why are we even asking? I just like had a friend, I saw a friend post a question on Facebook. What is best for this early thing? And everybody replied. And I almost did. And then I was like, I don't even really know what to say. It's just kind of timely what you just said. And I feel like if we could just rely on our instincts a little more, like you said, all these books and all this advice is taking away from us listening to ourselves. And you know this, moms know when the fever's coming, moms know when when something's off. And Jame, I feel like you just like unleashed this feeling that maybe just moms just need someone to say, like, don't even ask. Trial and error, because parenting is the most rapid learning curve you'll ever have. Hang in there. It's just a phase.
So I remember I hear you 100%. And I think it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where, I mean, it's got to be driving pediatricians insane. I remember my daughter didn't walk until she was almost 2 years old, which is extremely late. She walked on her knees. There were holes in the tops of her pants and on the tops of her shoes, and the soles of her shoes were clean until she was almost 2. Every time we would go to the pediatrician, I would express concern, and my pediatrician was like, she's fine. Like, there's nothing to worry about. So I took that as the best possible advice that I could get. And I just remember the paranoia from the other moms at the park. They were like, are you sure this is okay? Because she was getting kind of tall for a kid to do that. And fortunately, because again, Facebook was still sort of in its infancy, that kind of thing, I still had the wherewithal to be like, the pediatrician says it's fine. I'm not going to worry about it. And it didn't stress me out. If I had had my kids later and there was more influence from those forums that you're talking about and those question asking and the internet, I don't know that I would have had that confidence. I would like to think I would, but I don't know that I would have, because that's the first thing we do. We don't even ask the pediatrician first anymore. Instead, people come to them with all of their information that they've found out from all their friends and all their mom groups and all the web. And it's like madness. But I also, again, the biggest crime is that it diminishes people's confidence in their own parenting. And it is tragic. And it's very heartbreaking. And I see it now with all the college shit. people applying to, I mean, I can't even, it's like I have to stay away from it because it's the same thing. People have been, and it's moms who've been brought up in this lack of confidence that if you make one mistake, you're not setting your child up for success.
Yeah. Shelly has said that so many times on the podcast with several of our guests, where she has said, you know what? The mom always knows. The pediatrician too, where you're just like, no,
Yeah.
I know my child,
Yeah.
and you just have to just trust that.
But I really blame technology for so much of this. Listen to your heart and listen to your kid. Listen to your heart more because your kid is not as smart as you are. But
yeah.
Listen to your heart. Yeah. Do you think that that's how it? I just wonder, because it's almost like you don't even remember what it was like before technology. I have trouble going back and going what was it like before all this? You hear what did we do? Well, we went outside, we did all this stuff. But as parents, was there a lot more listening to yourself as a parent? I wonder.
It's hard to say. I think a lot of us Gen X kids would say, well, it's not like my parents were, having deep conversations with
Correct.
me. In fact, I would credit improv comedy with making me a way better listener than my parents, because one of the tenets of improv, the most important one, is to listen. It's literally a practice and a skill. And it's something that I not only implemented on stage for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows, but then as a teacher.
How do you feel that improv has influenced the yes-anding of parenting, I guess is kind of what
Absolutely. And adapting and switching tack in the middle and really listening to your kid. I do think in everything, there's moderation, right? I was gentler than my mother. I'll give you an example, okay? This is something that hopefully your parents of teenagers will relate to. Because of the scourge of our society, my kids have phones. And because of the pandemic, they got them earlier than they would have. So now I've got a senior and a freshman in high school in the car for carpool in the morning. Today it was just my kids. And I see my little hoodlum in the back with his fucking AirPod in. And I go, hey, get off your phone. He goes, what? I go, let's talk. I go, who would you rather be? Jonathan Bailey right now, or Jeff Goldblum in his prime? If you had to know, who are you more attracted to, or who you want? We just played Would You Rather. It did not succeed for more than half of the commute, but they were into it. And it reminds me that we can still connect with them on that analog level and break through if we're willing to just try and be dopey and stupid. It sucks that our generation has to fight the phones all the time. I resent being put in that position. But if we can find little ways to remind them that when the day comes that they are without their phone, or they abandon their phone, or they go to an unplugged space or whatever, that their brains will still work, that they'll find ways to amuse themselves. And improv helps me with that. It helps me fill those spaces a little bit, which helps ease my anxiety because I worry a lot.
You're fucking beautiful and fucking awesome and fucking amazing. I'm so grateful to just be sitting here with you and listening to someone who's it feels like sometimes you need someone to just kind of fight for you a little bit. You're for moms and for creatives and for women, and you're sitting here telling it like it is with such beauty and strength.
I believe in us. I don't think we need all of this noise. I also know that I'm doing the best I can. And I really believe that we must empower ourselves to listen to our own beliefs. And I think there's a lot coming at us. There is no perfection in this.
Creative Mamas Unplugged is produced by Breatheasy Productions with music by Jeremy Jurin. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to give my mama 5 stars and keep coming back. Thanks to us kids, there are plenty of stories to tell. And you are not alone. Bye for now.